I was just a simple woman trying to navigate through this exclusive charity gala when the elite guests started pointing and whispering about my worn leather shoes. But when that tech billionaire stood up and made an announcement that silenced the entire ballroom, you could hear a pin drop. Before we dive into this incredible story that completely transformed my understanding of worth and recognition, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Trust me, this twist will leave you questioning everything you think you know about judging others. And stick around until the end, because what happens will completely change how you see the world around you. My name is Elena, and 8 months ago, I was living a completely different reality. I had just turned 32 and was working as a freelance graphic designer, barely scraping by in my small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of downtown. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does a struggling artist end up at the most prestigious charity gala in the state, surrounded by millionaires and celebrities in designer gowns? Well, that's exactly what I was asking myself as I stood in that magnificent ballroom, feeling completely out of place in my simple black dress and my old faithful leather shoes. I had received the invitation through my volunteer work at the local women's shelter, where I donated my design services for free whenever they needed promotional materials. The shelter's director, Mrs. Richardson, had somehow secured 2 tickets to the annual Hope and Dreams charity auction, an event that raised millions for various causes throughout the city. She couldn't attend due to a family emergency, and knowing how much I struggled financially while still giving back to the community, she offered me her ticket. "Take someone special," she had said with a knowing smile. "You deserve a night of elegance and inspiration." The problem was, I didn't have anyone special to take, and I certainly didn't have the budget for a gown that would fit in at such an upscale event. My entire wardrobe consisted of casual clothes suitable for client meetings at coffee shops and volunteer work at community centers. After days of internal debate, I decided to go alone, wearing my best black dress that I'd owned for 5 years, paired with the only nice shoes I had, a pair of brown leather flats that had seen better days but were incredibly comfortable and had carried me through countless design presentations and volunteer events. Those shoes had a story of their own. I had designed them myself during my college years as part of my senior thesis project, combining fashion with function. They were made from genuine leather with a unique stitching pattern that I had spent months perfecting. The design incorporated ergonomic principles that made them incredibly comfortable for long periods of walking and standing. I had even included small, subtle details like tiny embossed patterns along the sides that only someone looking closely would notice. At the time, my professors had praised the design, calling it innovative and practical, but I never pursued manufacturing them commercially. Over the years, those shoes had become my lucky charm. I wore them to every important meeting, every volunteer event, every moment when I needed to feel confident and grounded. They had walked me through job interviews, first dates, family gatherings, and countless hours of volunteer work. The leather had developed a beautiful patina from years of wear, and while they showed their age, they were still structurally sound and more comfortable than any expensive designer shoe I had ever tried on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I approached the grand entrance of the Meridian Hotel, I felt my confidence wavering. Valets were helping women in floor-length gowns out of luxury cars, their jewelry catching the light from the massive chandeliers visible through the lobby windows. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos escorted their partners up the marble steps, their every movement exuding the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. I almost turned around and went home, but something inside me, the same determination that had gotten me through college on scholarships and built my small but meaningful design business, pushed me forward. The registration process was smooth enough. The volunteers at the check-in table were friendly and professional, handing me my auction paddle and a program detailing the evening's events. The ballroom was even more magnificent than I had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with intricate murals, and round tables draped in pristine white linens filled the space. Each table was adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I found my assigned table near the back of the room and took my seat, trying to blend in while observing the social dynamics around me. The other guests at my table were polite but clearly came from a different world. They spoke casually about their recent trips to Europe, their children's private schools, and their involvement in various exclusive clubs and organizations. I contributed to the conversation when I could, sharing stories about my volunteer work and design projects, but I could sense that they viewed me as an interesting anomaly rather than an equal. As the evening progressed, I began to notice something that made my stomach clench with embarrassment. People were looking at my feet. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the glances became more frequent and more obvious. Women would look down at my shoes, then exchange knowing glances with their companions. Men would notice and smirk slightly before turning their attention elsewhere. The whispers started during the cocktail hour and only grew more pronounced as the evening went on. I tried to position myself strategically, keeping my feet under tables or behind chairs, but in a social setting like this, it was impossible to hide completely. During the silent auction browsing period, I had to walk around the room to view the various items up for bid, and that's when the comments became more audible. "Those shoes are certainly practical," I heard one woman say to her friend with a barely concealed laugh. "I wonder if she knows where she is," another voice whispered behind me. The most mortifying moment came when I was examining a piece of artwork donated for the auction, a beautiful painting by a local artist whose work I had always admired. I was genuinely interested in the piece and was leaning in to read the description when I heard a group of women behind me engaging in what they clearly thought was a private conversation. "Look at those shoes," one of them said, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "They look like something you'd find at a thrift store. Or, worse, like something someone made in their garage." The second woman laughed softly. "It's sweet that they let anyone attend these days. I mean, I'm all for inclusivity, but there should be some standards. This is supposed to be an elegant affair." The third woman in the group chimed in with mock concern. "Maybe someone should have a quiet word with her about appropriate attire." It's really quite embarrassing for everyone involved. I mean, those shoes have clearly seen better days. They look handmade, and not in a good way. I felt heat rising in my cheeks and a familiar tightness in my chest that came with being judged and found wanting. These women had no idea who I was, what my story was, or why I was there. They saw only the surface, only what fit their narrow definition of acceptable, and they had decided I didn't measure up. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was at a charity event, surrounded by people who claimed to care about helping others, yet they couldn't extend basic respect to someone they perceived as beneath their social status. The dinner portion of the evening was even more challenging. As we sat at our assigned tables, my shoes were more visible, and the comments continued. My tablemates were polite to my face, but I caught them exchanging glances and saw the amusement in their eyes when they thought I wasn't looking. The woman sitting directly across from me, who had introduced herself as the wife of a prominent surgeon, made several pointed comments about the importance of dressing appropriately for different occasions. "You know," she said while cutting her filet mignon, "I always tell my daughters that you're judged by your appearance before you ever open your mouth. First impressions are so important, especially in settings like this where you're representing not just yourself, but the causes we're all here to support." She glanced meaningfully at my feet before continuing. "It's really about showing respect for the event and the people who've worked so hard to organize it." Her husband nodded sagely, as if she had just shared profound wisdom. "Absolutely right, dear. Standards matter. That's what separates civilization from chaos." The other couples at the table murmured their agreement, and I felt increasingly isolated and out of place. I began to wonder if coming here had been a mistake. Maybe I didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. Maybe the shelter director had been wrong to think I deserved a night like this. As the evening wore on, the comments became bolder and the stares more obvious. During the live auction portion of the event, when everyone was focused on the auctioneer and the items being presented, I thought I might get some relief from the scrutiny. But even then, I caught people whispering and pointing, their attention divided between the expensive items being sold and my inappropriate footwear. The situation reached its peak when I excused myself to visit the restroom, walking through the crowded ballroom while trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. The whispers followed me across the room like a wave. "There she goes," someone said loud enough for others to hear. "Those shoes must have quite a story." Another voice added with cruel amusement, "I bet she's never seen shoes that cost more than $50. The laughter that followed felt like daggers in my back. I quickened my pace, desperate to escape to the relative privacy of the ladies, room where I could collect myself and decide whether to leave early. In the ornate restroom, I stared at my reflection in the gilt-framed mirror and fought back tears of frustration and humiliation. My dress looked fine, my hair was neat, my makeup was appropriate for the occasion. But those shoes, my comfortable, well-designed, personally meaningful shoes, had become a scarlet letter, marking me as an outsider who didn't belong. I looked down at them, remembering the pride I had felt when I first created them, the satisfaction of wearing something I had designed and made myself. They were good shoes, well-crafted and thoughtfully designed. The leather was genuine and had aged beautifully. The stitching was precise and strong. The comfort features I had incorporated still worked perfectly after all these years. But in this world of superficial judgments and status symbols, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that they weren't new, weren't expensive, and weren't recognizably from a luxury brand. They marked me as someone who didn't have the resources or knowledge to dress appropriately for high society. When I returned to the ballroom, the live auction was reaching its climax. The auctioneer was presenting the final item, a collection of original sketches by a famous fashion designer, and the bidding was intense. I tried to focus on the excitement of the auction, on the fact that all this money was going to worthy causes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched and judged. Every step I took felt amplified. Every movement of my feet seemed to draw attention. That's when I noticed him for the first time. Across the room, sitting at what was clearly the VIP table closest to the stage, was a man who seemed different from the other wealthy attendees. While everyone else was dressed in traditional formal wear, he wore a simple but elegant black suit that somehow managed to look both casual and sophisticated. His hair was slightly tousled in a way that suggested he didn't spend hours perfecting his appearance, and there was something in his posture that set him apart from the performative elegance around him. What struck me most was that he seemed to be watching me, but not in the judgmental way I had grown accustomed to throughout the evening. His gaze was curious, almost analytical, as if he was trying to figure something out. When our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, he didn't look away embarrassed like someone caught staring. Instead, he nodded slightly, almost respectfully, before turning his attention back to the auction. I later learned that this was Marcus Chen, the 38-year-old founder and CEO of Innovate Design Solutions, a tech company that had revolutionized the way people interacted with everyday objects. He had started the company in his garage 12 years earlier with nothing but an idea about making technology more human-centered and accessible. His innovations in wearable technology and smart design had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But he was known for his down-to-earth approach and his commitment to practical solutions over flashy gimmicks. As the auction concluded and people began to mingle again for the final networking portion of the evening, I found myself standing awkwardly near the silent auction tables, unsure whether to stay or leave. The comments about my shoes had continued throughout the evening, and I felt emotionally drained from hours of subtle but persistent judgment. I was examining a photography package donated by a local studio, trying to decide if I could afford even the minimum bid, when I heard a familiar pattern of whispers starting up behind me. This time, the group included some of the most prominent socialites in the city, women whose names appeared regularly in the society pages and whose opinions carried significant weight in these circles. They had positioned themselves just close enough for their conversation to be overheard, and I realized with growing horror that they were putting on a deliberate show for the benefit of anyone within earshot. "I cannot believe the standards have fallen so low," the first woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "When I first started attending these events 20 years ago, there was an understanding about appropriate attire. People respected the occasion and dressed accordingly. Now we have people showing up in homemade shoes that look like they belong at a craft fair rather than a charity gala." The second woman, whom I recognized as the wife of a city council member, laughed knowingly. "It's really quite shocking. I mean, we're raising money for important causes here. The least people can do is show some respect for the event and for the donors who make it possible. When you dress inappropriately, you're not just disrespecting yourself, you're disrespecting everyone who's worked hard to make this evening successful." A third voice joined in, belonging to a woman I had seen earlier posing for photos with the event organizers. "And those shoes, my goodness. They look like something a college student would make for an art project. There's confident, and then there's delusional. Someone should really have a word with her about what's appropriate for events like this. It's becoming embarrassing for everyone involved." The cruelty in their voices was unmistakable, and I felt my face burning with shame and anger. These women, who claimed to be supporting charitable causes and helping their community, were engaging in the most basic form of bullying, using their social status to make someone feel small and unwelcome. The hypocrisy was staggering, but what hurt most was that their words carried weight in this environment. Other people were listening and nodding along, accepting their judgment as valid social commentary. That's when everything changed. That's when Marcus Chen stood up from his table and began walking across the ballroom with purposeful strides that commanded attention. The conversations around him gradually died down as people noticed his movement and tried to figure out what was happening. By the time he reached the area where I was standing, surrounded by the whispering women and their growing audience of onlookers, the entire ballroom had fallen into an expectant silence. He looked directly at me with a warm smile that seemed to acknowledge both my discomfort and my dignity. Then he turned to address the group of women who had been discussing my inappropriate attire with such authority and disdain. His voice, when he spoke, carried easily across the now silent ballroom, reaching every ear in the magnificent space. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and something in his tone made it clear that whatever he was about to say would be significant. I couldn't help but notice the discussion about these particular shoes, and I think there's something you should all know about them. The silence that followed his words was profound, the kind of quiet that comes when an entire room holds its breath in anticipation. Marcus Chen stood there with the confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. The women who had been so vocal about my inappropriate footwear now looked uncertain, their earlier confidence wavering as they sensed something significant was about to unfold. He walked closer to where I stood, his movement deliberate and respectful, never making me feel like a specimen under examination. Instead, his approach felt protective, like someone stepping in to correct a fundamental misunderstanding. The ballroom remained eerily quiet, with hundreds of the city's most influential people waiting to hear what this tech billionaire had to say about a pair of worn leather shoes. "I've been in the design and technology industry for over 15 years, he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "I've seen thousands of products, met countless designers, and evaluated more innovations than I can count. But I have to tell you, in all my years of business, I've rarely encountered craftsmanship quite like what I'm seeing tonight." The confusion on people's faces was palpable. They looked from Marcus to me, then down at my shoes, trying to understand where this was heading. The women who had been so confident in their judgment now appeared uncomfortable, sensing that their assumptions might have been spectacularly wrong. The society columnist I had noticed earlier was frantically taking notes, her instincts telling her that whatever was happening would be tomorrow's headline. "You see," Marcus said, turning slightly to address the broader audience while keeping me included in his circle of attention, "what many of you have been commenting on tonight aren't just any ordinary shoes. These are actually quite extraordinary, and I suspect most of you have no idea just how extraordinary they really are." He paused, letting the anticipation build while scanning the faces around him. I could see genuine curiosity replacing the earlier smugness in many expressions. People leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite themselves. The woman who had been most vocal about appropriate attire looked particularly pale, as if she was beginning to realize she might have made a significant error in judgment. "The stitching pattern you see on these shoes," Marcus continued, gesturing respectfully toward my feet without making me feel exposed, "incorporates a revolutionary ergonomic design that I've only seen in the most advanced athletic footwear. The leather treatment uses a technique that allows for both durability and breathability, something most major manufacturers struggle to achieve even with modern technology." I felt my heart racing as I began to understand what was happening. Somehow, this man had recognized the technical innovation in my college design project, details that I had spent months perfecting, but that no one else had ever noticed or appreciated. Features that I had incorporated based on extensive research into foot biomechanics and materials science. Details that had earned me top marks in my design program but had never been recognized in the real world. "But the most remarkable thing," Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone of genuine admiration, "is the integrated arch support system. It's built directly into the sole design in a way that provides comfort for extended wear without compromising the aesthetic lines of the shoe. That's incredibly difficult to achieve, and it requires both technical knowledge and artistic vision." The ballroom was so quiet now that I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning system. People were staring at my shoes with new eyes, trying to see the technical innovations that Marcus was describing. The same shoes that had been the subject of mockery and whispered criticism were now being examined with something approaching respect. "I know this," Marcus continued, "because my company has been working on similar problems in our wearable technology division. We've spent millions of dollars trying to develop products that combine function with form in exactly this way. We've hired teams of engineers and designers, consulted with biomechanics experts, and tested hundreds of prototypes. And yet, here's someone who solved many of these same challenges with what appears to be incredible innovation and craftsmanship." The woman who had been most critical about my attire was now looking around nervously, as if hoping to escape the growing attention. Other people were beginning to whisper, but these whispers had a completely different tone than the earlier ones. Instead of mockery, there was curiosity and even admiration. The shift in the room's energy was palpable, like watching a tide change direction. "What's even more impressive," Marcus went on, "is that these shoes show clear evidence of being custom designed for the wearer. Look at how perfectly they fit, how comfortable she appears in them, despite having worn them all evening. That level of personalization requires not just technical skill, but deep understanding of individual biomechanics. It's the kind of innovation that major footwear companies spend fortunes trying to achieve." I realized that Marcus wasn't just defending me against social embarrassment. He was genuinely impressed by the technical aspects of my design work, seeing value that even I had forgotten was there. His analysis was making me remember the pride I had felt when I first created these shoes. The satisfaction of solving complex design problems and creating something both beautiful and functional. "Now I have to ask," Marcus said, turning to address me directly while still speaking loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "Who designed these remarkable shoes? Because I can tell you right now, whoever created them has serious talent, and I'd very much like to meet them." The moment hung in the air like a challenge, and an opportunity rolled into one. Every eye in the ballroom was on me, but for the first time all evening, the attention didn't feel hostile or judgmental. Instead, it felt like genuine interest, like people actually wanted to hear what I had to say. The women who had been so cruel about my inappropriate attire were now staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. "I designed them," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected it to be. "I created them during my senior year in college as part of my thesis project on functional fashion design. I spent 8 months researching foot biomechanics, testing different materials, and perfecting the construction techniques." The silence that followed my words was different from the earlier quiet. This wasn't anticipation or judgment. This was genuine surprise and growing respect. I could see people reassessing everything they had assumed about me based on my appearance. The simple woman in the handmade shoes was revealing herself to be something entirely different from their initial assumptions. "That's incredible," Marcus said, and his admiration seemed completely genuine. "Could you tell us more about your design process? I'm particularly interested in how you achieved that arch support integration without compromising the shoe's profile." For the first time all evening, I felt truly confident and in my element. I started by studying the biomechanics of walking and standing. I explained, my voice growing stronger as I talked about work I was passionate about. Most shoes provide arch support through removable inserts or obvious built-up areas, but I wanted to create something that was integrated into the shoe's structure itself. The audience was listening intently now, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. Even the women who had been most critical were hanging on every word, though their expressions suggested they were beginning to understand the magnitude of their earlier misjudgment. I developed a technique for layering different densities of leather and other materials. I continued, feeling more confident with each word. The firmer support materials are sandwiched between softer layers, so you get the biomechanical benefits without the aesthetic bulk. It took dozens of prototypes to get the ratios right. "Fascinating," Marcus said, and I could tell he meant it. "What about the stitching pattern? That's not decorative, is it?" "No, it's completely functional," I replied, warming to the subject. The stitching follows stress lines in the shoe, reinforcing areas that receive the most pressure while allowing for natural flex in others. It actually makes the shoes more durable while improving comfort. The pattern also helps with ventilation by creating tiny channels for air circulation. I could see people around the ballroom looking at my shoes with completely new eyes. What had appeared to them as simply worn, handmade footwear was revealing itself to be sophisticated engineering disguised as casual design. The transformation in their expressions was remarkable, like watching people discover that what they had dismissed as a simple sketch was actually a masterpiece. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we need more of in the industry," Marcus announced to the room. "Someone who understands that the best design isn't about status symbols or luxury branding. It's about solving real problems for real people, while creating something beautiful in the process." The woman who had been most vocal about appropriate attire was now looking around desperately, as if hoping to escape the attention that was increasingly focusing on her earlier comments. Her husband looked equally uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that his wife had made a significant social error that could have professional consequences in their circles. "You know," Marcus continued, addressing the broader audience while still including me in the conversation, "this is exactly what's wrong with how we often judge innovation and creativity. We get so caught up in brand names and price tags that we miss real ingenuity when it's right in front of us." He gestured toward me with clear respect. "Here's someone who identified complex design challenges and developed elegant solutions using creativity and skill rather than unlimited budgets and marketing teams. And instead of recognizing that innovation, people were criticizing her for not wearing shoes from the right designer." The shift in the room's energy was now complete. People who had been whispering about my inappropriate attire were now looking embarrassed about their earlier judgment. The society photographer who had been documenting the evening's fashions was now taking pictures of my shoes, clearly recognizing that they had become the unexpected star of the evening. "I have to say," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "this evening has been quite educational for me. It's reminded me why I got into design in the first place, and why real innovation often comes from unexpected places and unexpected people." He turned to face the audience more directly, using his platform to deliver a message that was clearly important to him. Too often we assume that value and quality are synonymous with expense and exclusivity. We judge books by their covers and people by their accessories. But real innovation, real creativity, real value often comes from people who are solving problems, rather than following trends. The ballroom was hanging on his every word now. This wasn't just about my shoes anymore. It was about fundamental questions of how we recognize and value creativity and innovation. Marcus was using his influence to challenge assumptions that went far beyond fashion choices. "I want to propose something," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone making an important business decision. "Elena, would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration? Because what you've accomplished with these shoes suggests exactly the kind of thinking we need in our product development division." The offer hung in the air like an unexpected gift. Around the ballroom, I could see people recalculating their earlier assumptions about me, their expressions ranging from admiration to chagrin. The women who had been so confident in their judgment now looked mortified, clearly understanding that their social cruelty had been both wrong and potentially damaging to their own reputations. "I think," Marcus said, looking around the room with a slight smile, "this is a perfect example of why we should never judge people by appearances. The person you dismiss as inappropriately dressed might be exactly the innovator you've been looking for." The applause that followed started slowly, but built into something approaching a standing ovation. People who had been whispering about my shoes hours earlier were now clapping for the innovation and creativity they represented. The transformation was so complete and so rapid that it felt almost surreal. As the applause died down, Marcus approached me with a business card and a genuine smile. "I meant what I said about the collaboration," he told me quietly. "We've been looking for someone who thinks about design the way you do. Someone who prioritizes function and innovation over flash and brand recognition." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. People who had ignored or dismissed me earlier now wanted to hear about my design philosophy and my other projects. The women who had been most critical kept their distance, clearly understanding that any attempt to rebuild bridges would only draw more attention to their earlier cruelty. 3 months later, I was sitting in a modern conference room at Innovate Design Solutions, leading a team of engineers and designers in developing a new line of sustainable, ergonomic footwear. The collaboration with Marcus's company had evolved into a full-time position as Director of Functional Design, with a salary that was more than triple what I had been making as a freelance graphic designer. But more importantly, I was working on projects that mattered, creating products that would genuinely improve people's lives rather than just following market trends. My worn leather shoes, the ones that had been the subject of such cruel mockery, were now displayed in a place of honor in our design studio as inspiration for the team. The charity gala incident had taught me something profound about the difference between surface judgments and deeper understanding. It had shown me that real value often exists in places where people aren't trained to look for it, and that innovation frequently comes from unexpected sources. 6 months after that transformative evening, Marcus and I launched our first collaborative product line. High-quality, ergonomically designed shoes that combined sustainability with cutting-edge comfort technology. The line sold out within weeks, and fashion magazines that had never covered functional design were featuring our products as the future of footwear. The real victory, though, wasn't commercial success. It was the knowledge that sometimes the thing that makes you different, the thing that others criticize or dismiss, might actually be your greatest strength. Those old leather shoes had carried me to exactly where I needed to be, even when I couldn't see the destination myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.